Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. Welcome to the audience in Middle Georgia. Officially today, WMAC and Macon comes online with the Erick Erickson Show. If you'd like to call and be a part of the program, you are permitted. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. This hour brought to you by First Liberty of Georgia. If you're a small business, medium-sized business, you want to grow and become a big business, go to FirstLibertyGA.com. Great people, great company. They can help you grow, get you access to capital without all the bank bureaucracy. Good friends of the show. Help support the show. Go to FirstLibertyGA.com for more. I was going to start with the Comey interview, but before I get to the Comey interview, you need to know James Cook was arrested in Athens. Those of you who are Georgia fans will need to know this at least. Those of you who are Georgia Tech fans, you can laugh as I relay the news. Georgia football player James Cook was arrested on a pair of misdemeanor charges Saturday morning. He's a sophomore running back from Miami. He was pulled over by Athens Clark County Police, charged with driving with an open container of alcohol and an invalid driver's license. He was released by 2:57 a.m. on a $2,000 bond. There's no word yet on whether or not it'll affect his eligibility for the bowl game. Kirby Smart is aware of the incident. We can move on from there, but there's your headline to get you worrying about the bowl games. How about that? Now, let's get into the IG report. We'll get to impeachment. Yes, James Van, what's his name? Jeff Van Drew is fleeing the Democratic Party. Who knew when you went into the weekend thinking the Democrats had just voted on impeachment of the President of the United States that they would wind up the week with a smaller majority in the House of Representatives? One Democratic member of the House is bolting the Democratic Party. Now, here's the richness of this. Just let me put it in perspective, and we'll come back to it later. Just savor it for a moment. Jeff Van Drew went into a Democratic primary in 2018, and Democratic progressive activists poured money into that primary to beat him. He's a congressman in New Jersey. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee poured millions of dollars into the race to save Jeff Van Drew, to save him from AOC and her minion pouring money in to beat him. Then she was even a congressional candidate, but she was already rallying progressives against moderate Democrats, and they were pouring money into this race to beat him. And the Nancy Pelosi's DCCC poured money in to save Jeff Van Drew. And how's he paying them back? He's becoming a Republican this week in protest of impeachment. Okay. We'll get back to this. We will, but I gotta spend a little bit of time on the IG report because James Comey made the TV rounds this weekend. It didn't go very well, in large part over the Christopher Steele dossier. Oh, and before I forget, thank you, Alan Sanders, for filling in for me on Friday. We're at that time of year where we've got school recitals and Christmas concerts, and I thought I could pre-record the first half of the show, make it sound like I was live, and then sneak into the studio on Friday and do the rest of the show live. And logistically, it became impossible, and Alan was able to jump in at the last minute and save me from the wrath of my child for being able to actually go to his Christmas concert. So thank you, Alan. Now, before we set the stage on Comey, let me review for you what the media said about the Christopher Steele dossier. You will recall Christopher Steele was the British intelligence agent hired by the Democrats to do a summation of all the dirt on Donald Trump, to inquire into foreign intelligence services about Donald Trump. Turns out that Christopher Steele was paid in part by a Russian oligarch. That's right. Christopher Steele was taking money from a Russian oligarch while all of this was happening. The Democrats were paying him, and the media wanted us to know it was all true.
Parts of the now infamous dossier on Trump have proven to be true.
I know the history of the dossier, but it hasn't been discredited. In fact, it's been the opposite. It's been corroborated. Much of the dossier has been corroborated.
This discredited dossier, which was paid for,
Your intel community has corroborated all of the details in there. The meeting.
Some of the substantive content of the dossier we were able to corroborate in our intelligence community assessment, which from other sources in which we had a very high confidence level.
We know that with the FISA application, the relevant parts of Christopher Steele's dossier were
Say
corroborated.
that if the application included information from the dossier, it would only be after the FBI had, in fact, corroborated information through its own investigation.
We also know that as time goes on, more and more parts of the Steele dossier get corroborated.
So when the president just refers to it as fake dossier, that is false.
I don't think that is the accurate characterization for the entirety of the dossier.
To be clear, investigators have corroborated part of the dossier.
Dossier has been corroborated by the intelligence community.
U.S. investigators have corroborated some of the allegations in that dossier, although
We do know that parts of it have been corroborated.
It's not been corroborated, but it hasn't been disproven either.
Is there anything in the dossier that has been disproven?
No.
But not one thing has been disproven. No major thing from the dossier has been conclusively disproven.
To date, none of it has been disproven, and whole big parts of it are holding up.
The dossier holds up well. None of it has been disproven.
All of the allegations in it, I don't know that anything has been disproven.
It's a fact that none of it, not one word, has been disproven. In fact, a lot of it turned out to be right on the money.
Former high-ranking intelligence officials have told us on the record that there is nothing in the Steele dossier that they know to have been disproven.
Much of the dossier has been corroborated. Do you not accept that
I don't agree with that, Alice.
This is our reporting, and this is what crime-fighting agencies have said, that the FBI would not have just taken a dossier to the FISA court and used that as their predicate for the surveillance. They had to corroborate it themselves. That's how they operate.
Well, it turns out that there was some there should be some crow eating. There should be, but there's not going to be any crow being eaten by the media. The media is not going to come out and apologize. Interestingly enough, though, Dick Durbin of Illinois came out and said the FBI owes Carter Page an apology. Page, you will recall, was surveyed by the FBI, and turns out in part it was based on the Christopher Steele dossier that calls the surveillance of Carter Page. Well, here's Dick Durbin on CBS over the weekend.
By the FBI. And specifically, I want to ask you about what an FBI lawyer did when he retroactively changed an email that was presented as part of evidence regarding a Trump campaign associate, Carter Page. Jim Comey's on Fox this morning, and he said Carter was treated unfairly. Does the U.S. government owe Carter Page an apology?
Well, I can certainly tell you, based on what we saw, they do. And here's the bottom line. Many of us have been looking at this FISA, the secret FISA court for years, saying this isn't the first and won't be the last time that the FBI misrepresents evidence before this court and proceeds. We have tried to reform the proceedings. Senator Lee, Republican, Senator Leahy, Democrat, myself, and others have been pushing for FISA reform. We couldn't get the Republicans to join us in that effort. Maybe now they will. This should be a bipartisan effort to clean up the FISA court. What happened in this situation was inexcusable. But remember what the Inspector General said as the bottom line. Opening this investigation was warranted and not political.
But he also said there were 17 significant errors that he uncovered alone.
Yeah, and well, about the Carter Page dossier, you've heard the media saying everything about the Steele dossier was not disproven. Not that it was proven, but it wasn't disproven. Just to remind you from last week in the Senate hearing of the Judiciary Committee, here's Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, appointed by Barack Obama, talking about the FISA application.
For example,
if I could click the right button here. It's morning. My coffee's kicking in. Here we go.
For example, the Crossfire Hurricane team obtained information from Steele's primary subsource in January 2017 that raised significant questions about the reliability of the Steele reporting. This was particularly noteworthy because the FISA applications relied entirely on information from the primary subsource's reporting to support the allegation that Page was coordinating with the Russian government on 2016 U.S. presidential election activities. However, the FBI did not share this information with department lawyers, and it was therefore omitted from the last two renewal applications.
Yeah. Well, so Chris Wallace interviewed James Comey. First of all, you do have to give James Comey credit for going on with Chris Wallace, who has the reputation of a tenacious question asker. Is that even a word? And that Comey went on Fox News. He went on Fox. He could have gone someplace safe. He could have gone to MSNBC, but he went on with Chris Wallace, and well, it didn't go well for James Comey.
Director Comey, not only do you fail to go back to the president-elect or president after January 20th and tell him, oh, you know that report I briefed you on? Turns out it's bunk. But the FBI goes back and renews its FISA application 3 more times. And by this point, the FBI knows that the Steele reporting is not credible.
Yeah, I think you're mischaracterizing both what the FBI knew and what Mr. Horowitz says in his report. They didn't conclude the reporting from Steele was bunk. They concluded there were significant questions about the reliability of some of the subsource reporting. That should have been included in the renewals. But when I briefed the president, I briefed him on a small part of it that I told him I didn't know whether it was true or not. I didn't care. I just needed him to know about it.
I think you're mischaracterizing. Steele isn't, or rather, Horowitz isn't saying that the subsource, the Russian contact, was unreliable or was inaccurate. The Russian contact said to the FBI, Steele is unreliable because he misrepresented. Steele misstated or exaggerated the source's statements in multiple sections of the report. He's saying, I told him one thing and he wrote something else. The FBI knew that.
Yeah, but that doesn't drive a conclusion that Steele's reporting is bunk. I mean, there's a number of tricky things to that. First, you're interviewing the subsource after all the reporting has become public. And so as a counterintelligence investigator, you have to think, is he walking away from it because it's now public? Well, and that has to go into your assessment of Mr. Steele.
It hadn't, I mean, if it had become public just barely, this is in January of 2017. This isn't 2 years later.
So the subsource says the Steele, he told Steele X and Steele reported Y, and Comey says, well, it doesn't mean Steele was wrong. Oh, it went downhill from there.
Did you know all of this?
All of what?
Everything that we're talking about here. Did you know that, in fact, the Steele report was the key for probable cause? Did you know that the FBI had talked to the Russian contact and he said what Steele said he had told him was not true? Did you know this? You're the FBI director.
First, again, the report will speak for itself. I don't believe the FBI concluded that Steele's reporting was bunk after talking to a subsource. But no, I didn't. As the director, you're not kept informed on the details of an investigation. So no, in general, I didn't know what they'd learned from the subsource. I didn't know the particulars of the investigation.
But this isn't some investigation, sir. This is an investigation of the campaign of the man who is the president of the United States. You've just been through a firestorm investigating Hillary Clinton. I would think if I were in your position, I would have been on that, like a junkyard dog. I would have wanted to know everything they were doing in investigating the Trump campaign.
Yeah, that's not the way it works, though. As a director sitting on top of an organization of 38,000 people, you can't run an investigation that's 7 layers below you. You have to leave it to the career professionals to do, to the special agents who do this for their lives. And if a director tries to run an investigation, it'll get mucked up in all different kinds of ways, given his or her responsibilities and the impossibility of reaching the work that's being done at the lower level.
So instead it just got screwed up with the lower level. Now, hang on a second. Hang on. Because I think there's a relevant point here. First of all, notice how the media is not seizing on this. When a deputy junior assistant undersecretary for bottle collection at the Department of Health and Human Services makes a mistake, it becomes a national scandal when the media finds out about it, and they throw it in the lap of the President of the United States. And it doesn't matter which administration it is. It doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat, although more so with Republicans. It is always the problem with the President of the United States. Here is the FBI director acknowledging that his junior underling 7 layers down screwed up an investigation. It is not disputed that the inspector general, I mean, you got Dick Durbin, for Pete's sake, on national television saying Carter Page is owed an apology. You have the Inspector General saying that that Christopher Steele screwed up the report and misrepresented people in his report. You've got the Horowitz saying that the FBI relied on Steele's dossier. And what is James Comey's response? Oh, well, the buck doesn't stop with me. It stops with someone 7 layers beneath me. Can you just ask yourself this? I don't care what your partisan persuasion is. Just ask yourself. If President Trump were to do this and say, I knew nothing of it, it happened 7 layers down from me, what would the media response be? Well, you don't have to go too far. Because it was the Obama administration that decided to start putting children in cages along the Rio Grande, and the media said nothing about it until Donald Trump became president. And now suddenly it's his problem when it was an Obama-era decision. I mean, we can see the bias in this, and the fact they're giving Comey a pass on this is absurd. But he said more. We've got more audio to play when we come back. It is Erick Erickson here across the state of Georgia. If you'd like to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERICK, E-R-I-C-K, 877-973-7425.
Want to be on the show? Call Erick now at 877-97-ERICK. That's
You can text the word show to 33777. Yep, that's it. Text the word show to 33777. You'll get the podcast. You'll get the show notes. You'll get a link over to theresurgent.com where you can read me every day. Fair disclosure, full warning. This is the Christmas season, and I spend more time writing about faith and culture than I do politics, although I do have some stuff on impeachment over there at the Resurgent today, and we'll get to that impeachment stuff. But we still got Comey and his statements to Chris Wallace didn't go so well for him. And we got to get there. But before I do, can I comment as an aside? I made the mistake while we were in commercial to check out the weather. And can winter make up its mind? So it's 54 here in Macon right now. In Athens, it's 54. In Blue Ridge, 57. Clarksville, it's 52. 57 in Dalton. Basically, 54 Jasper, 59 Rome. It's in the 60s all over South Georgia. Valdosta, Vidalia is 55. But South Georgia, it's in the 60s right now. And I'm looking at this, and it says that the high today here in Macon, where I am, is 73 degrees this afternoon. And then tomorrow, 90% chance of storms, 68 for high, 34 for a low. And by Wednesday, it's going to be in the 20s again. We're all going to die of pneumonia. I mean, we in my house, everybody in my house has had the sinus congestion and cold. It's been miserable. The weather cannot make up its mind. Can we get it some Thorazine or something to like calm the effects of the weather schizophrenia or so? Weather in the South. Next week, summer. And then on Christmas Day, it'll be cold. Maybe. We'll see. Okay, back to James Comey and Chris Wallace.
Did you know all of this?
All of what?
Everything that we're talking about here. Did you know that, in fact, the Steele report was the key for probable cause? Did you know that the FBI had talked to the Russian contact and he said what Steele said he had told him was not true? Did you know this? You're the FBI director.
Yes, you heard that clip, but it's important to hear Chris Wallace's tone of voice in this. Chris Wallace clearly is surprised by James Comey defending himself. He's clearly surprised by Comey's attitude in all of this. And Comey, of course, is just like, oh, no, it was 7 levels down. I didn't want to be held accountable. So then Chris Wallace decides to go for it. Comey penned an op-ed and said he felt vindicated by the Horowitz report. Horowitz asked about it, says no one should feel vindicated by it. So Chris Wallace asks the question.
Think this is vindication?
It is. I mean, the FBI's had to wait 2 years while the president and his followers lied about the institution. Finally, the truth gets told.
Does your report vindicate Mr. Comey?
It doesn't vindicate anyone at the FBI who touched this, including the leadership.
The IG says you should feel no vindication.
Well, maybe it turns upon how we understand the word. What I mean is that the FBI was accused of treason, of illegal spying, of tapping Mr. Trump's wires illegally, of opening an investigation without justification, of being a criminal conspiracy to defeat and then unseat a president. All of that was nonsense. I think it's really important that the Inspector General looked at that and that the American people, your viewers and all viewers, understand that's true. But he also found things that we were never accused of, which is real sloppiness. And that's concerning. As I've said all along, has to be focused on. If I were director, I'd be very concerned about it and diving into it.
Y'all, I'm sorry. But James Comey has shown himself to be a man out of his moment. A man too small for history. He was a bureaucrat who ran a department of law enforcement bureaucratically. 15. And to quote Jeremiah Wright, his chickens have come home to roost. And he can feel vindicated all he wants, but it was a damning indictment of him and his tenure as FBI director.
Today, my new dad threw a barbecue.
Today,
Just as we come back from break, I get a notification on my iPhone. MyFitnessPal thinks I need to step on a scale and update my weight. I feel personally trolled by my iPhone right now. I will have you people know I went to CrossFit at 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. I have no idea why. And then I went home and slept. And then I made sugar cookies. The phone number, if you'd like to be a part of the program, it's Erick Erickson here, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. And we need to move on from the IG for a little bit. Actually, no, I got to play one more clip from Chris Wallace, because Wallace was really good in this interview. I appreciate Chris Wallace being willing to ask tough questions. You know, the president doesn't like Chris Wallace. He thinks Wallace is out to get him. But Wallace is just out to get everyone. This is the thing that the president doesn't understand. It's like, you know, I told the president, he called me a while back, and I told him, you know, I'm in an interesting position. I just hate everybody in politics these days. I mean, he's a nice guy personally. The president and I disagree on some things, but it's nice to just look at politics today and just be revolted by all of it. Well, so is Chris Wallace.
Oh, I understand. There are two parts to this report. Horowitz says there was no political bias in opening the investigation. He talks about problems with big problems with the FISA process. But isn't it harder to argue that there was no political bias overall when you see 17 mistakes made by 3 teams on 4 separate FISA applications?
You know, this is one of the things about this. You've got 4 teams, 3 or 4 teams. You've got 17 errors that are based on political bias. You've got, for those of you who don't understand what happened here, I mean, we really need to put this in perspective. That the FISA application, the lawyer at the FBI, the lawyer in charge of the FISA application, reached out to the CIA to ask the CIA if Carter Page was a source for the FBI. The CIA responded, yes, in fact, Carter Page is a source for the FBI, or for the CIA, rather. And then the FBI agent says to the FISA court, the CIA says he is not. I mean, just put this in perspective. This is Ted Cruz engaged with Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General who was appointed by Barack Obama.
So the men and women at home need to know what's happening. A lawyer at the FBI creates fraudulent evidence, alters an email. That is in turn used as the basis for a sworn statement to the court that the court relies on. Am I stating that accurately?
That's correct. That is what occurred.
That's what occurred. That's extraordinary. That is extraordinary. And to say, oh, well, no political bias there. Yeah, there were all sorts of problems. There were. Now, I need to circle back with you. As I mentioned, I was supposed to be here on Friday. And thank you again, Alan Sanders, for filling in. Really spur of the moment, too, when I realized there was no way I could make everything work Friday to get back in time for my son's Christmas program. The British election happened on Thursday, and it was a blowout by the Conservatives. And we're still having conversations in this country about whether or not it's relevant in this country. One of the things that I think is very notable is that the media is taking a position that, well, you know, our American left is not as left as the British left. We don't have the anti-Semitism that the British left has. This comes on the heels of a mass shooting in New Jersey by a bunch of anti-Semites where the left rushed out and said, oh, white supremacy, it's all Trump's fault. And then it turned out the shooters were black and hated Jews. And now you've got Bernie Sanders endorsing Sink Younger, who is running for Congress in California. And video has come out of Sink interviewing David Duke positively about the nefarious influence of Jews in America. But the media says that the American left isn't as far left as the British left. I do have to say, there's a video out this morning, and I can't play it for you. I cannot play the video of remember the woman on election day. She was wearing, I think it was the orange raincoat as the president is sworn in, and she's on the ground and her ears are covered. No! It's one of the funniest clips ever of this impeachment or this La Resistance movement woman who's just, I wish they would go back and find this woman, go into the mental institutions of America and find this woman who's no when the president was sworn into office. The British are reacting this way. The British progressives are reacting this way to Boris Johnson. And they've taken to the streets marching saying, he's not my prime minister. And just like in this country, they marched on election day, or on inauguration day, saying he's not my president. He's not my prime minister, they're saying. And Boris Johnson has come out and said, it's true. He's not their prime minister. He's actually Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's prime minister. He's not their prime minister. He's not. He doesn't even represent these people in Parliament. He represents a smaller constituency in Parliament. He's actually just the Queen's first minister. He has nothing to do with these people. But they're marching to the streets. They're calling him all sorts of things I can't run on radio. It would be bad form of me to play. There might be children listening. Can't play him on radio. But they're in total meltdown over there. But he's not their prime minister. They're totally correct. And even Boris Johnson has come out and said, basically, fact check, true. I'm not your prime minister. I'm the Queen's prime minister. The meltdown, though, there are some parallels. But you got to understand that with the British election and our election system here, things are somewhat different. Like last week, so Charlie, my producer, texted me and said, why are the exit polls so much quicker and more accurate there than they are here? Actually, the exit polls here are really accurate. Exit polling in the United States, you got to remember, though, the difference is that exit polling in this country comes in waves. There's a morning, a midday, and an evening exit polling in this country. The morning and the midday are never accurate. You have to wait until the evening exit surveys are compiled, exit polls are compiled with the morning in the afternoon. The reason you have to wait for the evening is because there's a larger pool of voters who vote in the evening in this country than there are in the mornings and the afternoon. The mornings and the afternoon skew very heavily to the Democrats. Republicans show up after work, not before work. So you've got all these situations involved here. But you also have 45 million voters in the UK and 245 million voters in the United States. Have a massive more pool of voters. Plus, in the UK, all they're voting for is Parliament. So you go in and you vote for your party. Are you voting for Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, Green, Scottish National, Sinn Féin, Democratic Union, whatever. And then you leave it, and the pollsters get asked, did you vote Conservative? Did you vote Labour? Did you vote Sinn Féin? Who'd you vote for? They're not allowed to ask that question in this country. The reason they're not allowed to ask this question in this country is the same reason you are not allowed to take a picture in this country of your polling location. I did this before, so I vote off Bass Road here in Macon at Maple White Baptist Church. And go in a couple of years ago, and I took a picture and tweeted out, I voted. And I showed that I voted for Brian Kemp against Stacey Abrams. And a friend of mine who works for the Secretary of State's office called me, before I got to my car, called me and said, you got to delete the picture. It's illegal. Huh? It's my vote. Freedom of speech. Nope. It's illegal. It's illegal. You cannot take a picture of your ballot in the United States. It is illegal. And the Supreme Court has actually upheld it. And the reason the Supreme Court upheld it is for the same historic understanding of why pollsters cannot stand out polling locations at exit polls and ask who you voted for in this country. They can in Great Britain, and that's why the exit polling is so accurate and goes so fast. But in this country, we have a history of white people in the South in the 50s and 60s, actually even before the 50s, forcing black people to go in and vote for particular candidates. That happened in parts of the South. It also happened in parts of the North, if we're honest about it, but particularly pervasive in the Jim Crow South, where if a black voter wanted access to the polls, they had to promise to go in and vote for someone. And so oftentimes someone would go in with them to oversee, And in the rise of cell phones, it works the same way. You can't take a picture of your ballot because of voter intimidation laws. In the same way, there are mask laws in the South that have been upheld by the Supreme Court that except on Halloween and whatnot, you can't wear masks in public because anti-Klan laws. We have unique quirks due to discrimination in the South after the Civil War that mean that exit pollsters in this country have a harder time than in other countries. In Canada and Great Britain and France and Germany, Australia, New Zealand, anywhere, you can have an exit pollster stand outside and ask which party someone voted for, or in some cases, which candidate they voted for. And it allows the pollsters to accurately tabulate quickly who people around the country voted for, and it allows them to get a very accurate snapshot. In this country, you're not allowed to do that. It is against the law. The Supreme Court has upheld it. In this country, when a pollster stands outside a polling location, have you ever taken an exit poll? You don't have to. And the way exit polling works is actually very fascinating. When I was at CNN, I had to study this for the exit polling. And this is one reason why exit polling tends to actually be very good in this country, because they've had to work very long and very hard over the last 100 years with the Associated Press and others to get a detailed snapshot of how the electorate works in this country. First of all, what they do is they find swing precincts. They know that in some areas, like in my voting precinct is very much a Republican precinct. When I go in and vote, it is like the Republican Party has a dinner on the grounds meeting. You expect casseroles with dry macaroni and cheese and fried chicken at the polling location. It's going to be the whole Republican Party is going to be there from North Macon. You either go over to Idle Hour, the country club, or you head to the polling location. And everybody sees each other every 2 years, and all the Republicans know, oh, haven't seen him today. Better give him a call and make sure he shows up. But you go downtown in Macon, and it's exactly the opposite. It's a Democratic precinct, and it is overwhelmingly a Democratic precinct, and everybody knows it's a Democratic precinct. In fact, I've got a buddy of mine who is a Republican who in downtown Macon showed up to vote in a primary, and they automatically handed him the Democratic ballot. And he's like, no, I want the Republican. And it's like, oops, my bad. But they just know everybody who shows up is going to be a Democrat. Now, as a corollary, I got a friend of mine who showed up at a voting precinct in North Bibb County that's very Republican, and they handed him the Republican ballot. He's like, oops, nope, I want the Democratic ballot. He's a professor. In any event, so there's no reason to go do an exit poll in an overwhelmingly Republican or an overwhelmingly Democratic precinct. So you go to a swing district or a swing precinct. And in the swing precincts, you map them out. Where are the swing precincts in a state? The Associated Press and local reporting agencies assign someone to be there. And they have to stay back so many feet from the polls, but they can come up to you afterwards. And usually the local boards of elections give them a little attitude. And they say, hey, I'm an exit pollster for national media organizations. Could I ask you about the election? And they say yes. And the questions that they ask are not the questions that they would ask you in another country. They're not going to ask you, for example, if they were to do this in your polling precinct in 2020, they would not say, did you vote for Donald Trump or the other guy, whoever that person is on the Democratic side. They're not allowed to ask that question. They can't even ask, did you vote Republican or did you vote Democrat? They're not allowed to ask that question. What they can ask you is, what's your race, black, white, Hispanic, ethnicity? Do you think the economy is headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? I think it's headed in the right direction. Do you tend to support the president's policies or not? I tend to support the president's policies. Do you believe that the country is better served by maintaining the status quo or changing it? I think we need to maintain the status quo. Do you believe that the Democrats went too far to the left this year with their nominee? I think they did go too far left. Are you a member of a major political party? I am. Do you mind saying which one you are? I'm a Republican. Okay. You can ask that. You can get to that question. So here we have a voter who says the economy's headed in the right direction. It would be better if we maintained the status quo. The Democrats have moved too far to the left, and this person is a Republican or independent or whatever. Hey, I bet that person voted for Donald Trump. You see what I'm getting at here? Is you can ask who the person voted for, but you can't ask who the person voted for. You got to ask a series of questions designed to be able to show. But now, here's the genius of it. In Britain, with the exit polling, you can ask, did you vote Labor, Conservative, what have you? And then you can ask questions. Do you think one side's too far right? What do you think about anti-Semitism? All these questions that the exit pollsters asked. In this country, though, you have to ask more questions. It takes longer to get through an exit poll in this country. There are many more people who do the exit polls in this country, spread out. There were 30,000 people who did exit polling in the UK. There will be about 50 to 60,000 in the United States. It'll be spread out in key swing precincts around the country. But they will have a copious amount of knowledge about where the election went. Because they can't short circuit it by saying which party did you vote for, they have to ask questions to give a strong sense of where people think the direction of the country is going. So then you get to 2020 in this country, and what will be remarkable is we will have a highly accurate data set of a massive amount of voters who are statistically sampled in a reliable way, who can tell us, do black voters think the country's headed in the right direction? Do Hispanic voters think they're succeeding in the economy? Are white voters really concerned about health care compared to black and Hispanic voters? We'll have all of that data, and it provides a good snapshot of where the country is. Way better than your random opinion polling. Exit polling is highly reliable when it's properly adjusted, and you do have to properly adjust it. But it'll be a very interesting snapshot headed into 2020 when we see the exit polling. We do have some polling out today you need to know about from CBS News, and it's not actually good news for the Democrats pursuing impeachment.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Erick Erickson, the information.
CBS News is reporting Barack Obama says women are pretty indisputably better than men. Why did he fight so hard to keep a woman out of the White House in 2008 then? Makes you wonder. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show, from the North Georgia mountains to the Florida line, from the Chattahoochee to the Atlantic Ocean, and on Facebook Live and the series of tubes known as the Internet. If you would like to be a part of the program, you can call 877-97-ERIC. 877-973-7425. Also, I sent out the sugar cookie recipe the other day. For those of you new to the program, yes, every week I send out a recipe or two. You can get on the recipe list. It's non-political. Why? Because I believe that whether or not you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, progressive, conservative, socialist, communist, whatever, you should at least be able to break bread together and find something you have in common. And so I'm making it easy by giving you easy recipes. And I sent out a sugar cookie recipe, and I got lectured by some lady on Instagram. I don't think she listens to the show, so I'm just going to tell you. So an older lady who informs me she's been making sugar cookies for 50 years. And in 50 years, she's never seen a sugar cookie recipe with self-rising flour. It's always all-purpose flour, baking soda, salt, eggs, oftentimes butter. Mine had oil in it. And I replied back, you do realize that self-rising flour is all-purpose flour with baking powder and salt already added. Nope, it didn't take that well. Nonetheless, the sugar cookie recipe was a hit with a lot of people, and I'm telling you, I discovered on my front porch last night, goes good with bourbon too, the sugar cookies. If you want that recipe or more, if you text the word recipe to 33777, I will send you back a text message asking for your email address. When you send me your email address, I send you a link to all the recipes, including the sugar cookie recipe. There will be more recipes out this week. Text recipe to 33777. Do you know what Hillary Clinton's margin of victory was in 2016 in the popular vote? Anybody? 48.2% of the American public supported Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump got about 46% of the vote. Now, he won because of the Electoral College, but Hillary Clinton inarguably won the popular vote in this country. She got more votes than he did, but that's not the way we elect presidents in this country. You have to get a consensus of states in this country, not a consensus of people. Why? Because people are stupid and the founders knew it, so they rely on the Electoral College. Come on, we're all sinners. We know it. Well, Hillary Clinton got 48.2% of the popular vote in this country. If you take the polling averages, take the poll average, take all the polls on impeachment and average them together to get a pretty accurate snapshot of where the public is based on various polling models. Impeachment polling, according to the Real Clear Politics impeachment polling average, polls at 47.2% of the vote in support of removing the president of the United States. In other words, impeachment polls worse than Hillary Clinton polled in 2016. Impeachment gets fewer supporters than Hillary Clinton got in 2016, which might suggest that maybe we should allow the public to settle this instead of Congress settling it. And now comes a rumor in Capitol Hill, on Capitol Hill, I guess I should say. Now comes a rumor on Capitol Hill that Nancy Pelosi may not actually submit articles of impeachment to the floor of the House. What's that, you say? Well, there are some people who want her to advocate a position that since the deck is already stacked against impeachment in the Senate and those icky, awful, mean Republicans aren't going to give it a fair hearing, there's no sense wasting anyone's time, which really, this is a total cop-out to protect the Democrats because moderate Democrats really don't want it to happen. Oh, I got a lot of news to discuss with you on impeachment right here on the Erick Erickson Show. When we come back across the state of Georgia, we're going to have some fun. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show across the state of Georgia and around the nation. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425 if you want to be a part of the program. Y'all, did you leave the end of last week thinking, I think the Democrats are going to see a decrease in their majority in the House because of impeachment. I don't know about you, but I didn't actually see that coming. And at the end of the week, word broke that Jeff Van Drew, a Democrat from New Jersey, is switching to the Republican side. The president has been pestering him. Van Drew is one of a handful of Democrats who are opposed to impeachment, more and more vocally so. His district leans Republican. Let's just be clear here. Van Drew does not oppose impeachment on principle. Jeff Van Drew opposes impeachment as a matter of self-preservation. Van Drew is a moderate Democrat who lives in a district that is increasingly Republican. He is worried about being redistricted out next year. Progressives have been rallying against him in his district. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others have been raising a ton of money to beat him in a Democratic primary. So he has switched to the Republican Party over impeachment. I got to tell you, things are not going well for the Democrats. A focus group, Axios, the website, news website, has conducted a focus group on Obama voters who voted for Trump in 2016. And they conducted the focus group in Saginaw County. That's in Michigan. This is relevant because Saginaw County is one of those areas Hillary Clinton completely ignored in 2016. It is an area that went for Barack Obama twice. And Barack Obama won it by nearly 12 percentage points in 2012, and then Trump won Saginaw County by 1.25 percentage points in 2016. Focus groups are not polls, and you do need to understand that. Polling, listen, I am in the just, if you're new to this program, there are some really terrible pollsters out there. But there are some really good pollsters out there. Pollsters do not always get it right, but as a snapshot in time, polling actually, depending on what the poll does, is a pretty good idea. Polling cannot tell you public policy questions. Polling is terrible for shaping, for the public, shaping public opinion. Polling can tell you who's ahead, who's behind, stuff like that. Polling can tell you impeach or don't impeach. Polls that are simple can tell you information. Polling, though, and focus groups are different things. Focus grouping is a handful of people in a room. This is 10 people in Saginaw County. They're all people who voted for Barack Obama, and it can give you a good snapshot of what's actually happening in Saginaw County, Michigan. It can't give you a snapshot of what's happening in the nation. But Axios, this news website, has been doing a series of focus groups around the swing counties of the swing states. So in Ohio, in Michigan, in western Pennsylvania, in Iowa, in Wisconsin, they've been doing focus groups of voters who they know voted for Barack Obama and they know voted for Donald Trump. And let me tell you what Axios is finding with these people, which is fascinating. The voters hate the fact that House Democrats are moving toward impeachment. They call it a distraction from issues that would improve their lives, like Social Security, cracking down on illegal immigration, keeping jobs in the United States. Chad, a 43-year-old Obama-Trump voter, said of Nancy Pelosi, I think she's wasting a lot of taxpayer money on a ghost chase. The money she's spending on that could go to help the homeless or towards health care. Another participant, 73-year-old Michael, said Democrats' focus is in the wrong direction. Instead of working on policies and things that will help the people, they're just working to basically preserve their own position. They don't really care about you and me, I don't think. So here's what Axios says about these swing voters who voted for Obama and now are Trump voters. They've got no trust in the media. Their support for Trump will grow even if the country enters a recession or a full-blown trade war with China. They credit Trump with making health care more affordable thanks to his tax law, which some say has saved them in taxes they can reallocate for prescription drugs. Now, in past focus groups in the upper Midwest, they've heard voters say they wish Michelle Obama would run for president. They've soured on Trump's personality, and several of them indicated they would vote for Obama over Trump in 2020. But the same voters have a common disdain for impeachment and of the Democratic field. And so they'll go with Trump. Now, this is the most interesting thing here. Is that in all of these focus groups, and if you're a Republican, pay attention to this one, if you will. In all of the focus groups in the Midwest, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Iowa, in Michigan, there's a very common refrain that carries over into the British election from last week. The voters don't like Trump personally, but they're voting for him because they like the Democrats even less. There's a common refrain among swing voters. The swing voters do not like the leftward drift of the Democratic Party. And you hear the intellectual elite in our country on the media tell you that the Democrats in this country, they're not as far left as the Labor Party in Great Britain, but it doesn't matter. It's all relative, is it not? Our far left may not be their far left, but our far left is still further left than where the American public is comfortable. There is an apples-to-apples comparison in that regard. The British left drifted too far left for where the British public was. The American left is drifting too far left where the American public is. And we see that happening with these swing voters in these states, that they don't particularly like the president's personality. They don't like what he does, but they prefer his policies to the Democrats' policies. They understand that his policies are benefiting them by and large, and the Democratic policies would not, and that the Democrats culturally and socially are moving too far to the left for them. That's a problem for the Democrats. And it's coming out on impeachment. Here's the other thing I mentioned in the last hour. If you take the polling average right now, impeachment, the polling average for support of impeachment is 47.2% of Americans support impeachment. Hillary Clinton got 48.2% of the popular vote in 2016. In other words, Hillary Clinton got more votes than impeachment is getting, which probably suggests this should be left to the public and not to Congress. Josh Kraushaar has a column at National Journal Against the Grain. And in his column today is the political stalemate over impeachment. Nancy Pelosi wants to protect her most vulnerable members. Mitch McConnell's majority is on the line. Impeachment doesn't serve anyone's interest right now. With the House on track to pass articles of impeachment against President Trump this week, it's worth taking a closer look at the political impact of the process. Here's the uncomfortable reality for Democrats. After an initial surge in support for impeachment, when the record of Trump's July phone call with Ukraine's president was released, Americans have broken into their tribal patterns in reacting to further developments. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff's compelling hearings didn't move the needle much. Independents are divided on the issue. And while Trump's GOP base is energized to fight impeachment, many Democratic voters are more interested in hearing about pocketbook issues. Swing seat Democrats, particularly those from districts that Trump carried, are now a bit more circumspect about their impeachment intentions. Most are expected to vote for the articles passed by the House Judiciary Committee, but there will likely be a few more defections from Democrats representing the most conservative districts. Representative Lisa Slotkin of Michigan, one of 7 Democrats with national security credentials who led the charge for impeachment hearings, sounded surprisingly evasive when asked by CNN whether she'd made up her mind. Here's the uncomfortable reality for Republicans. A plurality of Americans support removing President Trump from office. Despite Republican claims that there would be a political backlash against Democrats for impeachment, support for removing Trump from office has risen or held steady through the process. And for all the bluster coming from Trump-defending House Republicans, their Senate counterparts are showing none of the same political cockiness. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has been pushing for a steady impeachment trial without many witnesses, believing the Republicans will be hurt by a protracted process that turns into a Trumpian spectacle. McConnell knows that the politics of impeachment aren't encouraging for senators like Cory Gardner and Susan Collins and Martha McSally. Those Republicans up for re-election in swing states would like to be able to declare Trump's behavior wrong, but not impeachable. It's possible Trump won't allow them to take that path. Impeachment's become a no-win proposition for both parties, the equivalent of a battle in the trenches where no side holds a clear advantage. Speaker Nancy Pelosi could have continued the process indefinitely, but it would have risked exposing some of the most vulnerable members of her caucus. McConnell could cater to Trump's demands for a political show with a parade of witnesses, but it would mean that he face a growing risk that Democrats win back the Senate majority. Meanwhile, President Trump's approval is identical to where it was before impeachment began. Nothing has changed. And again, to me, when you look at the data, you can say that the president's conduct wasn't good in the phone call. I don't think the president's conduct was good. I realize the president says it's perfect, and that's the talking point of the day, and every Republican is supposed to say it's perfect. But I don't think it was. I don't think it was smart of the president to get on a phone call with Ukraine's president when he knows there are people in the White House out to get him, when he knows that there is the supposed deep state conspiracy. We know the whistleblower was in the White House and had complained repeatedly about the president's behavior and finally got him. The president knows all this is happening and decides to raise Biden on a phone call with Ukraine's president. It wasn't a smart thing for him to do, and we should be able to acknowledge that. But was it impeachable? Was it a high crime or misdemeanor? The Democrats believed that Bill Clinton lying under oath in a court of law to deny an American citizen justice was not impeachable. If that wasn't impeachable, this isn't impeachable. What did the president get? Nothing. Nothing. That's the answer. Nothing. There's no reason to drag this out. Nothing. He got nothing. The Ukrainians did not investigate the Bidens, and the president gave them the money they were supposed to get. He got nothing out of it. And yet the Democrats want to impeach over this. They didn't want to impeach Bill Clinton. And, you know, that's the remarkably frustrating thing. I want to go to the New York Times and read to you the New York Times editorial on impeachment. Just some excerpts. If you'll allow, I got a couple excerpts from the New York Times, deeply relevant. Here it is. The vote against him will be strictly partisan, meaning that the Democrat victory will meet the arithmetic requirements of the Constitution, but will not carry its magisterial authority. History, in our view, will condemn the Democrats for using their constitutional powers as an instrument of partisan vengeance. The instrument was intended as a scalpel for the cutting out of cancers, not for the excising of unsightly pimples. Under the present circumstances of a polarized party line vote, it would be an assault on the Constitution as well as public confidence in that most precious American asset, the orderly quadrennial surrender of power from one chief executive of another. If the Democrats remove the president by simple force of numbers, the debate over whether this was a political coup will continue for decades and could become a bigger threat to civil stability than Mr. Trump's mendacity. A basic principle for impeachment ought to be that presidents stay in office unless the case against them is so strong that it persuades at least a substantial part of the public and their representatives in Congress on the grounds for impeachment, and that has not happened here. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That was actually their impeachment editorial in favor of Bill Clinton. The vote against him will be almost strictly partisan, meaning that the Republican victory will meet the mathematical requirements of the Constitution, but will not carry its magisterial authority. History, in our view, will condemn the Republicans for using constitutional powers as an instrument of partisan vengeance. Under the present circumstances of a polarized party line vote, it would be an assault on the Constitution as well as the public confidence in the most precious American asset, the orderly quadrennial surrender of power from one chief executive to another. If the Republicans remove him by simple force of numbers, the debate over whether this was a political coup will continue for decades and could become a bigger threat to civic stability than Mr. Clinton's mendacity. A basic principle for impeachment ought to be that the presidents stay in office unless the case against them is so strong that it persuades a substantial part of the public and their representatives in Congress on the grounds for impeachment. That was the New York Times then. The New York Times now has impeached the MF blankety blanker. Just like the Democratic representative said. The Orlando Sentinel, the Sun Times, the USA Today, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune. Oh, my goodness, they all want him impeached in 1998. All of them were opposed to impeachment for the exact same reasons. It's hilarious to read the 98 demands for impeachment of the president. The number one thing that all of these newspapers made then is, to quote the New York Times, a basic principle for impeachment ought to be that presidents stay in office unless the case against them is so strong that it persuades at least a substantial part of the public and their representatives in Congress on the grounds for impeachment. Under the present circumstances of a polarized party line vote, it would be an assault on the Constitution as well as public confidence to impeach the president. That was then, but no, none of them like Donald Trump, so they're willing to go along with it now. And that is fundamentally a problem. Public opinion in support of impeachment gets less support than Hillary Clinton got in 2016, and she didn't become president. There's no reason to oust the president now with less support than she got in 2016.
As both sides target Georgia for 2020, Erick.
phone number here, you want to be part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Let's go to the phones. Randall, welcome to the program.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
Better than I deserve, for sure.
Excellent. What's going on?
Eric, I had a instance that happened to me last night in Macon, Georgia, at the Cracker Barrel restaurant. I was in the restaurant, had been seated after waiting a few minutes, and while I was waiting for my food to be brought to my table, a manager approached me and told me that since I was open carrying my legally purchased firearm, that I would either have to do one or two things. One, I would either have to conceal my weapon, or I could take it back out to the car and leave it in the car. I asked this manager if there was any signage in front of the restaurant, at the front door, or whatever the case may be, saying that, guns weren't allowed, or you had to conceal carry, or whatever the case may be. And he told me that, truthfully, that until just a few minutes prior, that he wasn't even aware that Cracker Barrel had a gun policy in that regard. And gee golly whiz, I went on to inquire of him, since I know that I have been open carrying in that Cracker Barrel restaurant and many other Cracker Barrel restaurants across the great state of Georgia, and indeed the entire nation, and have never had been accosted about carrying open.
So I'm assuming that somebody in the restaurant saw you had your gun on you and was uncomfortable, was made uncomfortable.
Yes, that's the only explanation I could.
Yeah,
I could come up.
I got to tell you, Randall, thanks very much for the phone call. Good to get a call from Macon. I go back and forth on this issue. A buddy of mine who has open carry doesn't open carry. He's in the camp that it just makes him the first target if someone were to come in. Get the guy with the gun on first. But we do live in an age of heightened sensitivity. And I just my sense is always that we should do what we can to make other people feel comfortable, if only because if you're an evangelist for the Second Amendment and everyone around you is made to feel uncomfortable, I think ultimately it's certainly your right to do it. Now, if a restaurant asks you to leave because they got a policy and you don't leave, of course, then you get in trouble, trespassing and all that.
30.
And Randall, I totally get what you're saying. I do, and you never had a problem before, but we live in an age of heightened sensitivity with people, and if we're putting people off by the Second Amendment, are we undermining our own cause? I guess it's subject to debate there, but I do get what you're saying there. Some people get really uncomfortable these days with guns around, unfortunately. It is Erick Erickson. Welcome back. The phone number, want to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. There's a new book out, Restoring Our Republic, The Making of the Republic and How We Reclaim It Before It's Too Late. It happens to be written by a friend of mine, Ned Ryan, joining me now on the hotline. Welcome. How are you?
Hey, good to be with you, Eric. Man, I appreciate coming on and being able to talk about this.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the first question is the most important question. Have you gotten all your Christmas shopping done?
No, absolutely not.
See, this is why I love you, because I'm right there with you.
Amazon Prime. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Now let's get into this. So you got Restoring Our Republic, and last week I interviewed my buddy Dan Darling about his Christmas book. If there are listeners who want to get either Ned's book or Dan's book, if you text the word data to 33777, I'll send you back links to Dan and Ned's both of their books, so you can get them. You can get them on Amazon. Restoring Our Republic is Ned's, and I'm glad you're here to talk about this, particularly in light of the Horowitz report last week.
Oh, gosh.
Where, I mean, it really looks like basic institutions in our government are collapsing around us.
They really are, Eric. And some of the argument I make is this: what we're seeing today started about 100 years ago. If you realize what the progressives did, turn of the 20th century, dropping an administrative state governing philosophy inside of our constitutional republic, at some point the tension was going to explode to the surface. And that's really what we've been seeing the last few years, where a duly elected president of the United States shows up. I'm the duly elected president by the means laid out in the Constitution. I'm the one that decides domestic and foreign policy inside of my administration. An administrative state actor said, no, we don't think so. We're the ones that decide. And so at some point this was bound to happen because it's oil and water. They don't mix. And so I lay out in the book kind of where we came from. What was the founders' inspiration? Where did they put the pieces of the machinery in the republic in place? How did they do that? You know, I go through some of the Constitutional Convention debates. I lay out some of the ancient republics and some of their inspiration, Constitutional Convention. But I really get into, Eric, some of the whole philosophy of we were never meant to have a massive administrative state. And I make the point in the first chapter, we don't even know the exact number of the departments, agencies, and sub-agencies inside our federal government. We know it's somewhere over 430, but we really don't have a precise number. At some point, we have to make a decision. Is this really what we want? Or are we going to go back to a constitutional republic in which we say we have a need for government, right? We're no angels. We realize we're imperfect human beings in an imperfect world. That's what the founders got right. They knew that. They knew that those imperfect human beings should never be trusted with concentrated power. At the same time, they were optimistic that they could actually create a government that would allow us to pursue our God-given rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, within those bounds of ordered liberty. And then I make the point these progressives showed up and they're utopian statists. They're utopian in that they believe that we can somehow have human progress and perfection in this world, which is impossible. And they believe that the way to pursue that was through a massive, powerful state. And so they created this administrative state, concentrated power in the hands of imperfect human beings. Here we are today, and we have decisions to make. And I, in the last chapter, I make some offerings as to what some reform ideas should be to get us back to where we should be going.
Well, one of the things that captures my attention is we have for years, and you and I have had these conversations in the past about auditing the Fed, auditing the government, yes. and the amount of agencies and duplication within the federal government, we have no idea what it is. And on top of all of that, we've got this now increasing criminalization of the regulatory state. So you can, ignorance of the law is no excuse, and you can go to jail, but oh my gosh, there's a regulation that says you can't pluck 5 blades of grass, only 4 blades of grass. Well, you're going to jail, buddy. It really does make no sense.
Well, and some of the stuff that, even with the Horowitz report, but even along these lines, what you just said, we have this weird bifurcated legal system. We don't have equal application of the law. And this is, again, one of the poison pills for a republic where certain people with certain associations and certain political connections and people inside of the administrative state, well, they get a pass on some of these things. Where the rest of us, if we did half of what they did, if we did a fraction of what they did, we'd be in jail. And so at some point, you can't have these inequalities. In the opening chapter, I make the point, our founders made a very distinct choice. In the age of the divine right of kings, where the king was law, they made a decision to go the law as king. And at some point, we have to get back to this idea of the rule of law, that all stand equal before it, regardless of your last name, regardless of your connections, that the law is either equally applied or it's not. And if it's not equally applied, well, then I think all bets are off for the republic. But at some point, we're going to have to go in, and I hope that Donald Trump will do this. I do think he'll get reelected, but he's going to have to go in and as best he can, whether Congress will choose to do anything in the short term or not, make a strong push to say we are going to start devolving power out of D.C. I even offer in the last chapter of the book, Eric, he should shut down the Department of Energy. He should shut it down, put it into Interior Commerce, DOD, blow the building up, and then figure out how we can get 800,000 of these non-essential federal employees out of the federal government. There's 6 to 7 million private sector job openings right now. Get them out and then remove those jobs from the federal rolls. Let's start making really aggressive steps and saying we have to do this. If we don't do it, we're lost.
Well, you've got the situation where Sonny Perdue, the Secretary of Agriculture, former Georgia governor, is moving ag employees to the Midwest, and they're all quitting and protesting and threatening to sue because he's daring to move them out of Washington closer to the farmers.
Well, and you even look at what Josh Hawley and Marsha Blackburn are doing. They have put forward a piece of legislation in which it would put all the various departments around the country, which I agree with. I think we should shut a few more down besides Department of Energy. But break up the Leviathan. Break up this cabal that is in Washington, D.C. Put it into the various parts of the country. Get it out of D.C. So I agree, with former Governor Perdue and what Josh Hawley and Marsha Blackburn are doing. We have to take aggressive steps, and I think at some point, and you and I have had this conversation, we have to get Republicans into office that actually fundamentally believe this, because I think the problem with some Republicans today, in fact, too many Republicans, they don't have a fundamental disagreement with the administrative state as long as they are in control of it.
Right.
No. That's not the point. The point is, what do we fundamentally believe about a governing philosophy of limited government, our constitutional republic, and the diffusion of power? And I make the point, because of where we've gone, I mean, you look at what's taken place over the last 3 years. People have basically decided, I think, on the left, that democracy is kind of inconvenient. Our Bill of Rights kind of inconvenient. The Fourth Amendment, civil liberties, it's kind of a nice thing we talk about in our history books, but doesn't really apply today. And the 10th Amendment, federalism, is a total joke. At some point, if we don't take steps towards that, Bill of Rights is kind of this happy little fiction that really doesn't exist anymore.
I'm talking to my buddy Ned Ryan. He's got a new book out, Restoring Our Republic. If you want a copy of it, you can text the word data to 33777. I'll text you back a link. Ned, I remember studying a couple of years ago that the fastest area of growth in government hires is at the state level because they're having to hire employees to monitor compliance with federal government regulation. So we've now got this virus spreading where it's not just the federal government's gotten out of control, but states have to hire more people to ensure they're complying with the federal, not even federal law, just federal regulation.
Right. No. And if you look by the time you had federal government employees, state and local government employees, Eric, the last figure I saw, we were around the neighborhood of 20 million government employees. That's insane. That's absurd. The thing, but this is, and I make this argument too. We're kind of living the progressive dream, right? They believe administrative state, but they believe that a massive bureaucracy was a sign of health for a government, for a people, for a society. I make the argument it's not really a sign of health. I think it's a sign of sickness, because at some point we have to decide, are we going to be a self-governing republic? Well, a self-governing republic is based off people self-governing themselves, right? And at some point, if we don't decide to govern ourselves and actually believe that there are transcendent laws and absolutes, we will have massive bureaucracy, because I make the point, too, at some point people desire peace and prosperity, and they have to have a certain amount of order. We either bring it to ourselves and order ourselves, or it will be forced upon us. But you're right. This is getting to the point where, I live in Loudoun County. I look at these budgets. I look at the amount of government employees and what the money that we're spending and the levels we're being taxed at. This is insane. At some point, we have to decide this is the role of government and this is not the role of government. And if we don't, this, government once started. It seems once government is started, once a project is started, once a regulation is started, it never stops. It just continues to build and build and build. So I make the argument we've got to stop. We have to stop, and then we have to start reversing and devolving and shutting some of this stuff down. Kind of get us back into the proper balance of where we started a couple hundred years ago.
Well, you mentioned Loudoun County, and for folks who don't know, Loudoun County is in Northern Virginia, and this growth in Northern Virginia of not just federal government employees shifting the state towards the Democrats, but also the massive number of Fortune 500 companies. You drive that road out to Dulles now, and you head out towards Purcellville. You've got these massive Fortune 500 companies that are building headquarters there. Jeff Bezos now moved moving into the area and others, all to be closer and closer to the federal government. That seems almost like a court relationship, courtiers in a royal court, people trying to be close to that power.
Well, I say that Washington, D.C. has a whiff of Versailles about it. And by that I mean, if you look back at French history and Versailles, the people, the rulers, the ruling class, and that included not only the king and his courtiers, but everybody else, they were detached from the people, and they were rigging a system for themselves to benefit themselves. And you look at where we are right now in Washington, D.C., with not only what I call a ruling class, an administrative state, big corporations and big government are not the friends of freedom, right? And as you said, I mean, I live 30 minutes from the tech corridor in the Reston Herndon area where you were talking about all this massive growth. They're coming here so that they can get these government contracts, so they can get some of these government subsidies. And so I look at this, and at some point we have to decide, big government, big corporations, these are the enemy of freedom, these are the enemy of the people. At what point do we find a proper balance? And I have to tell you, Eric, I went in to the White House December of 2017 with this whole great tax bill, big corporate tax cuts, and I said, listen, I get it. I appreciate what you're doing for corporations. At the same time, half the private sector jobs come from small businesses. Why are you not giving them the equivalent tax cut to actually give them the benefit as they provide nearly half of the private sector jobs? And I was basically told, what, are you not happy that they get a break? I'm like, no, I am. At the same time, we should start thinking about how we actually benefit small businesses, who I think are far more pro-American in their worldview than our multinational corporate global corporations.
Well, you know, it's funny you say that, because I've got some disagreements with Josh Hawley on some of his policy pursuits, but I agree with him strongly on the idea that Washington tends to forget the small and medium-sized businesses in favor of the major corporations. And we see that here in Georgia as well, where you've got, and around the country, you get crony capitalist tax breaks from governments to bring in a Fortune 500 company that then competes directly with a company that's a Virginia-owned or a Georgia-owned company.
Right. Well, and part of the problem is because these corporations have so much money, they have the ability to have a massive lobbying shop. And I tell, when I do American majority trainings, I'm out there in the field, I tell people part of the problem that we have today is you have all of these special interests that have all of these massive lobbying shops that are in your elected officials' offices every day, multiple times a day sometimes. How often are you seeing your elected official? How often are you having conversations with them? And the problem is, and you know this, most of our elected officials are experts in self-preservation, right? And they're going to respond that when the bell rings, they're going to respond to it. Who's ringing the bell? And sadly, it's not the American people; it's other interests. But I have to tell you, Eric, I know we've had this conversation as well. But speaking of the Senate, you know, you go back and look at the founding fathers and what they actually envisioned for the U.S. Senate. I actually propose, I think one of the most damaging things to our republic was the passage of the 17th Amendment. And so I throw out, hey, let's have this conversation, because the founders envisioned the U.S. Senate being the state's house, right? The U.S. House of Representatives is the people's house. The Senate is the state's house. And for the first 123 years of our republic, the state legislators actually were the ones that confirmed Senate nominations to the U.S. Senate. It anchored them to their states, and it really gave federalism life. When we passed the 17th Amendment in the early 1900s, it removed senators from some of those obligations and accountability to their states. And so these are some of the reform ideas I put out in the book. And, you know, at some point we've got to have these conversations. Is this what we really want or not? And if we don't, well, we're not really living a constitutional republic.
We're almost out of time, but to that point, you know, I always say that the Democrats complain about money in politics. If suddenly you made the Senate be appointed again by the state legislatures, suddenly you dilute the money in politics, because you've got to spread it out across 50 state legislatures as opposed to focusing on 100 people, or more, really 34 at one time in Washington.
No, that's right. And again, it's the whole idea, as Josh Hawley and Marsha Blackburn are saying, devolve the bureaucracy out of D.C., devolve this power in the U.S. Senate back to the states, diffuse the power. Again, it goes back to founders knew we're no angels, right? You have to diffuse the power, not only between the branches of the federal government, but diffuse the power as far down as you can into localities, into the townships. And I talk a little bit about de Tocqueville and the whole idea of really not only the laboratory of freedom, but if people will put their rights and their freedoms into action in their local townships, then they begin to take back their freedom. They put their freedom into action, and they start to pull that power back it all kind of comes down to, I mean, this is another inspiration for the book, Eric. We're not really teaching real history and civics in our schools anymore.
No, we're not.
And so that was one of the things where I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a fairly brief book, 280 pages. Where did we come from? What's it supposed to look like? How do we get back to where we started so that people, once they've read it, can go, okay, now I've got a much better idea of what we're actually fighting for and understand our history better. We have something we're fighting for, Eric. You know that. I know that. I hope a lot of your listeners know that. But we've got to have more ammunition in this fight, not only against socialism, but against this massive administrative state.
Amen to that. Ned Ryan, thanks very much for stopping by the books Restoring Our Republic. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Hey, same to you, Eric. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Ned Ryan, the book, if you want a copy of it, Restoring Our Republic, text the word data to 33777. I'll send you back a link to that. And also, I interviewed Dan Darling last week on his book, The Characters of Christmas, so you'll get both links in the text message back to you. Text data to 33777.
News and in-depth analysis from Erick Erickson, live 5 days a week.
It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show across the state of Georgia. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. When we come back at the top of the hour, there's a story in the AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, about polling precincts in Georgia being closed and the impact that's having. National reporters are picking it up as proof that Stacey Abrams had the race stolen from her. Yeah, the national reporters, they're missing some data, and I want to spend a little bit of time on that, more than I've got right now. Right now, have you heard about the circle game at the Army-Navy game? Listen, when I grew up, I guess that this is you millennials came up with this. I didn't do this as a kid. You make the OK symbol down on your thigh. You make a little circle, and you put it on your thigh, and if someone looks down to see it, then you get to punch them in the shoulder as hard as you can. That's the circle game. Of course, boys on a playground came up with it. Of course. Makes sense. Well, at the Army-Navy game this weekend, cadets are being accused of making the white power symbol. They were playing the circle game. Now, so that you understand this, so I can put this in perspective, it used to be that the OK symbol was the OK symbol. There's an internet website called 4chan that is basically it's where professional internet trolls go to conspire to troll the nation. And a group of people there decided to start the meme that the OK symbol was a white power symbol, because if you do the OK just so, apparently you get 3 fingers typically when you do OK. I mean, even the emoji for OK has 3 fingers up, but if you hold it in such a way, it looks more like a W, I guess, and supposedly you make a P with your thumb and your what is your second finger, your pointer finger, I guess, and that has swept through the internet as now the OK symbol is a symbol for white power or something. I guess it looks more like a B and a W. Maybe it's for Best Western. I don't know, but apparently it is it's now supposedly, according to people on Twitter, a symbol of white power. I had no idea. I mean, I've been making the OK symbol about things forever, and so have you. And apparently, if you live on the internet now, it's a symbol of white power. I didn't even know this until the outrage over the weekend, but apparently some internet trolls came up with this. I guess now that I think about it, some kid got in trouble at the White House for supposedly doing this, but it's an internet meme by a bunch of idiot trolls online. Well, at the Army-Navy game, the cadets were playing the circle game, where you make the circle, but it looks like the OK symbol, which is a white power symbol, and now the cadets are under investigation because people on social media are outraged that they were making the white power symbol at the Army-Navy game. When if you watch the video, seems pretty clear they're playing the circle game, boys being boys, wanting to punch each other, Army and Navy wanting to punch each other. This is their excuse. Instead of having an all-out fight, they're playing the circle game. Yes. Does it strike you as stupid as well? It does to me, but these cadets are under investigation for internet trolls. Okay, so same thing here. Hallmark. Hallmark featured a commercial that showed 2 lesbians getting married and kissing. And I haven't seen the commercial. I assume they were attractive, so I'm not sure who complained. But apparently someone complained that Hallmark was showing a commercial of 2 lesbians getting married and kissing at their wedding. And Hallmark has a very high percentage of Christians watching. I've never seen a Hallmark movie, and I don't plan to start. Apparently, so Hallmark has a large Christian audience that was offended by showing 2 lesbians kissing at an altar before a preacher, I guess. And I can see that. Marriage is between a man and a woman. And as far as Christians are concerned, so Hallmark decided to take the ad. Well, now the Alphabet Gang has come out and which with pitchforks, Hallmark will be made to care. And now Hallmark is apologizing. They've done the glad shakedown with the gay rights groups, and they're paying. They're going to offer up some money, and they want the advertiser back, and they're apologizing for ever daring to offend the gay rights community as opposed to the Christians. You will be made to care, people. 15. You will be made to care. One side has to be offended. The other side. The whole thing's a dumb controversy, though. It all, again, started on social media. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here across the state of Georgia, around the nation, and on the internet. The Erick Erickson Show. The phone number, if you would like to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. It's finally starting to warm up here. Everybody's up. Nope. Clarksville, no, you're still below 60. The rest of us are above 60 here and making it 63, thank goodness. And blue sky outside the office. This weekend, the rain was just off-putting. Okay. We need to discuss the Voting Rights Act story in the AJC. You should know, however, there is some breaking news right now. A group has asked a federal judge to stop the purging of voters in the state. Federal judge is being asked to prevent Georgia election officials from canceling over 120,000 inactive voters. Fair Fight Action, that Stacey Abrams group, is suing the state over voting rights. They're asking, I don't know who, Steve Jones. I gotta tell you, just as an aside here, can Republicans get a clue? In Georgia, you know this stuff is going to happen. You know it's going to happen. So when the Secretary of State says they're going to begin the biennial purging of voters, every odd-numbered year in Georgia, the law requires they clean up the voter rolls and purge voters. Now, keep in mind, these are voters who haven't voted or even had contact with the Board of Elections in more than 7 years. It's 300-some-odd thousand people. The bulk of them are people who we know have moved out of state or changed their residency to new counties in the state, and so their old counties are being purged. So it's 120,000 people we've never heard of. They filed a lawsuit several years ago, and the whole thing was upheld. And so now they're filing it again, wanting to do it all over again. Listen, we know they're going to do this. It was abundantly clear that one of these activist groups was going to do it. I don't know for the life of me why Republicans preempt this stuff. Down in Bibb County, I'm here in Macon in Bibb County, where I'm broadcasting this show. Through a miracle of technology, it goes to my flagship station, WGAU, and Athens, and out around the state of Georgia to Clarksville and WCHM and Rome and WRGA and around the state it goes, Dalton and Jasper, up into the mountains and down to Adel and Quitman and Valdosta and Vidalia and you name it. But here in Macon, it's unique. Yeah, Macon is very unique, let's just admit. But it's unique because there is a Secretary of State's branch office in Macon. And do you know what else is in Macon? A federal district court for the Middle District of Georgia, which just so happens to be with the appointment of Tillman E. III, President Trump's nominee, who has been confirmed by the Senate for the Middle District of Georgia. It is a majority Republican appointed bench in the state of Georgia, as opposed to the Northern District, which I think has more Democratic appointees than Republican appointees. So if Republicans preemptively file a case on these things in the Middle District of Georgia, where there's jurisdiction, because there is a Secretary of State's office, then they at least have a fighting chance of getting a conservative judge instead of a liberal judge. And a conservative judge is probably going to say, hey, wait a second. You guys filed this exact same lawsuit 4 years ago and lost. There's no way I'm going to enjoin it this time. That's not going to happen. Gone to the federal district, the Northern District, and I suspect they're going to get a. Let's find out. We can see who is. Yes, Athens. He's in Northern District. Yep. A Barack Obama appointee. Coincidence? They file it. It just so happens to go to a Barack Obama appointee, and it's going to probably be held up. Again, you know these things are going to happen. Be preemptive about it, folks. Be preemptive. But there's a larger story in the AJC, and man, the national media is missing the context of these things. Let me read you an excerpt. Jake Tapp tweeted out an excerpt here. Precinct closures and longer distances likely prevented an estimated 54,000 to 85,000 voters from casting ballots on Election Day last according to the AJC's findings. Now that sounds bad, doesn't it? The AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Georgia's 7 million registered voters compared how distance to their local precincts increased or decreased from 2012 to 2018. During that time, election officials shut down 8% of Georgia's polling places and relocated nearly 40% of the state's precincts. Most of the precinct closures and relocations occurred after the U.S. Supreme Court ended federal oversight of the Voting Rights Act. The AJC analysis, by two nonpartisan statistics experts, showed a clear link between turnout and reduced voting access. The further voters live from their precinct, the less likely they are to cast a ballot. Precinct closures and longer distances likely prevented an estimated 50,000 to 85,000 voters from casting ballots. And the impact was greater on black voters than white ones. If black voters were 20% more likely to miss elections because of long distances. Without those precinct relocations, overall election day turnout likely would have been between 1.2% and 1.8% higher. Not enough for Stacey Abrams to have gotten a runoff. But we need to discuss a couple of things that's being left out of the conversation. I happen to know something about this. I was an elections lawyer, graduated from Mercer University's Walter F. George School of Law. I don't know. I don't think you're allowed. I think they're ashamed of Walter George these days at Mercer. You're not allowed to say they took the name off the law school. You know, and all the Confederate whatchamajiggy. He was a U.S. senator, famous, and we got a big in Georgia name for Walter George, but apparently you're not supposed to talk about him anymore at Mercer. But it was at one time the Walter F. George School of Law of Mercer University. Now it's just the Mercer University Law School. Walter F. George. Went to law school, interned in the Secretary of State's office, was an election lawyer. Let me explain the problem here. Prior to the collapse in the Supreme Court of the Voting Rights Act, the majority conservative bench ruled Section 5 unconstitutional. Section 5 is the preclearance. It had to be renewed by Congress repeatedly over the years and essentially said that southern states who had been part of the Confederacy had to get federal government permission to make any changes to elections. You want districts redrawn, you got to get clearance from the federal government. And if it was a Democrat in charge, guess what? They're going to give you preclearance if you're a Republican. And if you're a Republican in charge of Washington, the Democrats weren't going to get preclearance. It was all, it became a shakedown scheme, a partisan shakedown scheme, and it wasn't doing any good. And ultimately, the Supreme Court decided that, you know what, the Civil War is more than 100 years ago. You now have in a lot of these counties where people are complaining, you got majority Democrats in charge, you got majority black Democrats in charge. Hard to say they're discriminating a majority county, discriminating against the majority black residents. Hard to say that's discrimination. Also, there's plenty of discrimination in northern states that the Voting Rights Act doesn't account for. Among other reasons, that Section 5 preclearance was thrown out by the Supreme Court. Now, here's what used to happen when the Voting Rights Act Section 5 was in place. If you were, let's take where I am, Bibb County, Georgia. Bibb County is Macon. On the map, it's the center of the state, just north of Warner Robins. And prior to the Voting Rights Act, if the county wanted to close voting precincts, the county had to hire a lawyer to file a petition to the Department of Justice to get the Department of Justice to sign off on closing those precincts. If they couldn't get the Department of Justice to do it, they would have to file a lawsuit and get a court to say it was okay for them to do it. So you know what happened? They just didn't do anything. They didn't bother. It's too expensive. You want to close precincts because you don't have the money to keep that many precincts open. Well, it costs more to hire lawyers to do the pre-clearance stuff, so you just spend the money and you raise people's taxes and you spend money to keep open polling precincts, never mind the shift in population. Now, here's one of the things that's happening in Georgia. Rural populations in Georgia are reducing. And because rural populations in Georgia are reducing as younger people move into cities and suburban areas, they have all these precincts and they don't have as many people living there anymore. So some of these, let's take Macon County, Georgia, for example. Macon County, Georgia, poor county, predominantly black. They want to reduce their polling precincts because they don't have as many people. They can't sustain it. They don't have the money. They need to consolidate precincts. Well, they don't have the money to hire a lawyer to go to Washington to file clearance authorization, but they also don't have the money to keep these precincts open. So what do? Well, if they raise taxes, they chase more people out of the county. But that's basically what they got to do. Got to reallocate from law enforcement or education or other things to keep these precincts open. Well, now that pre-clearance is gone, they can actually close their precincts down. In many cases, you have poor counties, or take Wilkinson, which I think is the poorest county in the state. Large county in middle Georgia, very poor, a lot of dirt roads, a lot of people leaving the county, not a lot of industry anymore. It's a beautiful place, though. Man, if I had a bunch of money, I'd probably buy a massive tract of land out near there. Commute. It's a beautiful area, but it's a very poor rural area. And they want to consolidate some precincts. They want to combine some precincts. They don't have the money to keep them open. They don't have the money to pre-clear. They're kind of stuck. Well, now that pre-clearance is gone, they can make the changes they want. And you're talking about counties that are predominantly Democrat, predominantly majority minority. And in many cases, you're talking about counties where the majority of the county commission or the board of elections are black. And you've got outside groups that supported Stacey Abrams and supports Democrats claiming that this is racism. The reality is that counties are shrinking in population, they're shrinking in tax base, and they're shrinking in the ability to keep these precincts open. They don't even have enough volunteers. Forget paying poll workers. Let's say everybody, they don't have enough volunteers to man the number of precincts. Not only that, if you will recall, they've got to help maintain the machines. The Secretary of State's office in Atlanta is going to buy everyone the new electronic voting machines, but then they pay to maintain them. Those machines over time, you got to have a good place to store them. Those costs add up. They don't have all those costs. So they've got to consolidate. You won't get that from the typical hysteria you read in this. Georgia leads the nation, according to the AJC, in automatic voter registration, with more than 350,000 new voters signed up when they obtain their driver's license. There are a record 7.4 million registered voters in Georgia, though about 300,000 are scheduled to be canceled because they or haven't cast a ballot since early 2012. The Secretary of State said the convenience of voting resulted in record turnout during last year's midterm election, a 57% registered voter participation. He predicted heavy turnout in next year's election as well. There's also ease of early voting. Remember now, in Georgia, you can go to your board of elections and vote a week or ahead of time. Not only that, there's voting by mail. You fill out a form, you can mail it to your board of elections and say you can't get to your polling precinct, and they can send you a ballot to your house and you can vote by mail. So you can go to the board of elections and vote early. You can vote by mail in Georgia, or you can show up on election day. And yet somehow moving the polling precinct is bad, or shutting it down. If you'll recall Randolph County is a majority black county run by Democrats in South Georgia. Local officials proposed closing 7 of the 9 precincts in 2018. And the ACLU had a tantrum. They ultimately wound up closing 3 precincts. Those 3 precincts that they closed wound up being the 3 that voted for Donald Trump, by the way. The majority white precincts that voted for Donald Trump. The rest of the precincts stayed open. Media wanted you to believe there was racial animosity, racial bias, and a pro-Brian Kemp bias. Remember, the conspiracy theory was that the county hired elections and consultant who was on the payroll of Brian Kemp's staff, and he was trying to rig the election for Brian Kemp, which was nothing of the sort. It wasn't true at all. And his point was that in the precinct recommending they close, there's a federal law called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And your polling precinct must comply with the ADA. And the precincts did not comply with the ADA, and they did not have the money to upgrade the precincts. Therefore, because on federal law, the precincts needed to close. That's what he advised. Wound up not going with his advice. They closed all the precincts that went Republican. The Democrats on the county commission, majority Democrats, did that. time and time again, people try to find racial animosity as the reason these things happen and ask you to pay no attention to the fact they are either majority black counties, majority black county commissions, or majority Democrats. Somehow, supposedly, mysteriously, they're trying to benefit the Republicans. The facts never add up to these things, but they continue with the hysteria. The reality is the Voting Rights Act drove up costs on counties, and oftentimes it was cheaper for counties to go with the status quo than to hire a lawyer to make decisions that needed to happen to long-term save money, and they were losing money. Now they don't have the pre-clearance requirement, and so they don't have to hire the lawyers. They can just close the precincts. And what you have are predominantly Democratic counties making these decisions. Let's not forget the fact it's not the Secretary of State or the governor who makes these decisions. It is local counties that make the decisions. It is local boards of elections that make these decisions. And if you're in a county that is predominantly Democrat, guess what? Your county commission is predominantly Democrat. Your board of election is predominantly Democrat. But somehow the Democrats want you to believe that this is all a subversive plot of Brian Kemp and Donald Trump. Essentially, what they're trying to do is run an election based on a paranoid grievance and a sympathetic reporting apparatus in the state that tells you they're out to get you. When that's not it. You know what ultimately is it? Either they close these precincts or they raise your taxes. Take your pick.
Well connected and well respected. It's Erick Erickson, live every weekday.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. 246 years ago today, the Boston Tea Party occurred. Yeah, it's just reflecting on that for a moment. The Boston Tea Party is where, the colonists, racists dressed up as Indians climbed aboard and started throwing tea overboard in Boston Harbor. The area that Boston Harbor where the Tea Party happened no longer exists. They essentially built over it, filled it in and built it over, and now part of Boston's Big Dig. But it got the party started, so to speak, with the revolution, and it was a big deal. And I think that we as Americans often lose sight of these moments in American history. I got to tell you, before he left office, this is slightly humble brag, I realize. Before he left office, Vice President Cheney realized I had not been to the Vice President's mansion and invited me to come up for lunch at the Vice President's mansion in D.C. I was not alone. There were a number of other people there. Bill Sammons, Charles Krauthammer was with me, Fred Barnes, and a few others. It was a great lunch, and somebody, and I forget who, somebody who was there asked Dick Cheney if he saw divine providence in the creation of the United States, and Cheney said he hates to say what the mind of God is, and things like that. But if you read the book, there is a great book, and I read it. Cheney actually sent me a copy of it. 1864, Lincoln at the Gates of History, and it's not a biography of Lincoln. It's a biography of a year in the Civil War. Let's step back a little bit. The song, and I'll a little more time. I always do. Next week, I'll be here on Christmas Eve and Christmas. I heard the bells on Christmas Day. It is the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow song, I heard the bells on Christmas Day. And Longfellow wrote that poem that was turned into the song. The original poem was Christmas Bells. And Longfellow wrote it on Christmas Day, 1863. He had received word that his oldest son, Charles, had been critically wounded in a battle, and Confederates were making massive gains. By the middle of 1864, as the war is winding up, Lincoln is in danger of losing. The public is soured on the war because the Confederates are making massive advances. The Confederates have gone all the way up into Union territory. This requires Lincoln to write George McClellan and ask, if you're not using the army, might I borrow it? But by the end of 1864, things just, miraculously changed. Let's not mention the conquest of Savannah, shall we? But Cheney pointed to that and said, it's hard to say. God doesn't have a plan in all this.
7425.
Down in Thomas County, Georgia. Boston, Georgia. I didn't even speak of Boston Tea Party. This is more like the Boston Beer Party down in Georgia. Thomas County, Thomasville, not Thomaston, but Thomasville. Yes. A man apparently felt so bad about, but this is like Florida man has come to Georgia. A man felt so bad about breaking the law, he called the police 3 times to confess. Lieutenant Tim Watkins of the Thomas County Sheriff's Office told the Thomasville Times-Enterprise, a man called at 5 a.m. Friday to say he had stolen a car in Thomasville and was now about 2 miles away in Boston, Georgia. A Boston police officer went looking for the Chevy Impala, and 29-year-old Quint Rashid Langford couldn't find Langford or the Impala. Langford called back again to say where he was, and then finally called a third time to say he had broken into a convenience store and was drinking beer at a convenience store. Wanted to confess and turn himself in. He called 3 times. That was enough for the Boston police to track him down and arrest him. The car has now been found in Thomasville. Langford's going to be charged with second-degree burglary, and theft charges are pending. He's jailed awaiting a bail hearing. It really is. Florida is so close to Georgia where it's Florida man is contagious. I need to go off on a tangent. I got this stuff I'm just going to have to wait for tomorrow. I spend just a random moment. This is an actually Associated Press report that is in Time magazine. But the Thomasville Times-Enterprise has covered it. We had in the front of our neighborhood, if those of you are familiar with Middle Georgia, there's a Bass Pro Shop, and we live near the Bass Pro Shop, and there's a development being built up the other side of the interstate from the Bass Pro Shop, and a water main based on digging, a water main was ruptured. We were without water from Thursday evening at 5 o'clock till about Friday at 3 o'clock. It was supposed to be back on noon. It didn't come back on until 3 o'clock. And we finally got full water pressure, and then a laminated note on our door that there was a boil water advisory until further notice. And then at some point over the weekend, I didn't find it until the night, had a notice hanging on the door that it was all clear, didn't have to boil water anymore. Now, you don't really need to know that, other than I was really amazed that if I went to the Macon Water Authority website where we are, I couldn't find anything on their website about it. And I couldn't find anything in the local newspaper website. I couldn't find anything in any of the local TV websites, anywhere. The only place there was any information that was kept up to date was the Macon Water Authority Facebook page. I had to go to Facebook to find out about the situation. And there are a lot of people, even though most people have Facebook, a lot of people don't. And then there was a chain on Nextdoor. Nextdoor, if you don't know what Nextdoor is, that's kind of like Facebook for neighborhoods. It's actually kind of neat. It's better than your standard social media in that you get a postcard mail that your neighbors have invited you, and here's your code to get into Nextdoor, and it's about your neighborhood as opposed to your city. And there was communication there. What I was struck by is the decline in local media. Our local newspaper here in Georgia is I don't know how many reporters they have, but it's not a lot. And there was actually I was involved in a conversation last Tuesday with an older woman who was so upset now that he can't all he can read are the high school football scores on, and he can't get play-by-play of what happened in the big high school games anymore. Used to have that coverage now, and it really hit home with me with this boil water advisory, the collapse of local media around the state. The things used to be covered like this, you've now got to go to Facebook and actively find the information yourself. You know, local newspapers covering stuff like boil water advisories for parts of the community. And if it it leads with even the TV news websites. There are lots of crime reports, but not a ton of stuff about local things like a boil water advisory that actually potentially puts people's health at risk. It's just really a wake-up call in the decline of local media. And frankly, it's the reason I wanted to do this program across Georgia now is because we don't have a ton of media covering a ton of stories that are statewide stories, and you don't have any news shows. For example, if you listen to your typical talk radio station, you're going to find a host of shows, and those shows are going to be national news shows, and those shows as national news shows are not going to talk about Georgia politics or Georgia news. And if you've been listening to this program today, I certainly talk about my fair share of national politics and national news and national culture, but also try to talk about specifically stories in Georgia like precincts and the collapse of voting precincts and the impact pre-exemption or pre-clearance by the federal government in Georgia and the AJC report, things like that. Or this Georgia man getting arrested in Thomasville for stealing the car and breaking into the convenience store to drink beer. You're not going to get those stories at a national level. And it is very hard now for a political candidate, for a senator or the governor or even the vice president or the president to be able to hit all media outlets in Georgia at once. It's one reason I'm so aggressively trying to grow the show across the entire state of Georgia. So, and I make no bones about it. One would like to focus much more on national stuff. I would like to have a nationally syndicated radio show as opposed to just regional show or a Georgia show. And hopefully one day that will come, but I can't ignore and then my own backyard. There are certainly stories. I mean, the pre-clearance story is a perfect example. It's a Georgia story, but it's getting national attention, and it's great to be able to weave that in. But for right now, being a show in Georgia and trying to find news about Georgia, it really is amazing to me, one, the collapse of newspapers around the state. You used to be able to go to newspaper websites around the state and find detailed local news, and it's real hard to do that now. The Macon paper or the Columbus paper are both by McClatchy, and typically you go to either one and you think you're looking at the same website, but for a blurb or two different. But that's not to say that it's not there. Local TV stations in particular are picking up the slack, or radio outlets. For example, in Athens, you can go to the Banner Herald website or go to WGAU Radio, which is a talk station and has news about that area. In fact, you can find more of it there. Go to Savannah. You can go to some of the different radio and TV stations in Savannah often and find more news than you can about the local area in Savannah. The Savannah and the Augusta papers as well are kind of no longer putting out the copious volume of local information. The downside of those, though, is that by their nature, TV and radio news is short. You've only for your evening newscast 30 minutes, and in that 30 minutes, you got to do news, you got to do weather, you got to do sports, you got to do community interest stuff. With a newspaper, you have much more to be able to do it, and the newspapers aren't doing it. Reasons and national companies buying local newspapers and then bleeding the local newspapers dry to subsidize other newspapers. It's become a real problem, and we've heard this happening. We've seen this happening. If you live anywhere in Georgia, by and large, you've experienced this, the decline in local media. But to have this boil water advisory situation this weekend, it really did kind of an eye-opening moment there. One of the stories that has largely flown under the radar as well statewide that I've given some attention to is Georgia Power. Power wants a rate hike, and the Georgia Public Service Commission is expected to vote on that this week. It's actually going to be tomorrow. And I got to tell you, there's an organized campaign against Georgia Power for a rate increase. They wanted a 7% increase. They have cut that percentage increase, and they wanted to go from $10 a month for their basic service fee to $17.95. They're agreeing now to a $14 increase. It would be spread out through to 2022, and they're right, by the way. Let me just cut to the chase here. Georgia Power deserves the rate hike increase, and none of us want to pay more for our rate hike increase, but they make a lot of sense in why they need it. And all you need to do is look at California. In California, the PG&E, the Pacific Gas and Electric, is bankrupt. The utility is bankrupt. The utility kept denied the ability to increase basic service fee. And what was happening is more and more people in California were moving to solar and wind power and taking themselves off the power grid. And they were taking themselves off the power grid. PG&E, the electric company, very much like the situation here in Georgia, when you take yourself off the power grid and put a solar panel on your roof, if there's excess power, the power companies, thanks to lobbyists, the power companies are required to buy the excess power from you. They may not want it, but they're required to buy it from you. What was happening in California, though, is that though the solar panel and windmill user was allowed to sell their excess energy to PG&E, PG&E could not charge them for use of the power lines. That's where the basic service fee comes in for power companies. If you get power from Georgia Power, your power bill may be $50 a month. It may be $300 a month. Every single person pays a basic amount, $10 a month, just to cover maintenance on the lines. So if someone here in Georgia puts a solar panel on their roof and generates excess electricity, they can force Georgia Power to transmit power through Georgia Power's lines, and they're going to get charged $10 for using Georgia Power's lines. In California, the power company was prohibited from allowing people to do that. So what happened in California is the power companies had to meet certain clean energy requirements. They couldn't get clean energy users to help subsidize the cost of maintenance of the line, and so they directed all their money meeting clean energy requirements and did not clean the lines. Now, what are you talking about cleaning the lines? Well, part of it is you got to trees. We got big power lines down Bass Road in Macon, where I live, and Georgia Power this past summer came through. They had tree trimmers, hired contractors to come down and clean all the lines so that tree limbs wouldn't fall on them during hurricane season. In California, they stopped doing that. They stopped paying to trim the trees. They stopped paying people to fly over the lines in helicopters and look at the lines to see if there was rust or anything exposed that was wrong. They stopped doing that. It's because they had to comply with their energy costs. If they didn't meet California's clean energy goals, then they were going to be fined way more than they had in the bank. So in addition to not being able to charge people for use of their power lines, they couldn't clean up their power lines because they had to spend their money on other stuff. The whole thing has gone bankrupt now, and all these fires have been started, and now in California, the power company is turning off the lights. When there are high winds that come through now, the power company turns the power off for days at a time in Northern California, and people are in the dark. And a lot of it comes to California told them you weren't allowed to charge people for a basic maintenance fee on the lines. And that's ridiculous. If you use the power line, if you have a power line coming into your home, you should be obligated to help cover that cost. It's part of your bill. You may not like it, but everybody pays it. And thankfully here in Georgia, people who resell their power to Georgia Power, they pay it too. But there's a catch. Some people completely pull themselves off the grid. And it's always rich people. It's always rich people in Atlanta. And that means there are fewer people to maintain the grid. And as a result, because there are fewer people that maintain the power grid, the cost goes up for the rest of us. It is unfortunate. It is one of the side effects of people switching to solar and wind. Here in the Atlanta area, the solar power adoption in Atlanta is not great. It has to do in South Georgia, and Georgia Power, frankly, is catching up. You go south of Macon, there's a huge solar energy field. They got solar, I mean, it looks like weeds sprouting up, but it's solar power panels all over, and they're doing a good job of trying to convert where they can to solar power. But, I mean, with the weather like we've had in Georgia the last couple of weeks, I can't imagine that they're going to be making as much off the solar power panel grid as a lot of environmentalists claim they will, because it gets cloudy in Georgia. There's this thing, rain, that they don't have in the desert they have here. But nonetheless, in any event, so Georgia Power wanted to jack up their $17 an hour. They're going to jack it up to $14 an hour. They're going to spread out the increase. It'll be $12 by 2021, $14 in 2022. And all of the people who have fought them tooth and nail on any rate increase are suddenly like, oh, yay, this is acceptable. Which I would submit to you gives rise to a lot of cynicism. when they've been fought tooth and nail over the ability to raise the rates. And by the way, you should know they haven't raised rates in a decade. They committed a decade ago to not raising rates for a decade, and now, so they held it at $10. Now they're coming out and saying, okay, time to raise it. They're raising it to 14 from 10 to raise it $4 after a decade of no increase. I think they've probably earned the right to raise the rate. It's going to affect you. It's going to affect me. It's going to affect us all. But it is still a smaller increase than the rate of inflation over the last decade. And you got environmentalists out there blowing them up for it. Maybe we should actually, and you know what the awful fear is? You know what the terrible, awful fear, the attack of the left on Georgia amounts to? They make a profit. How dare they actually make a profit? When did making money become a bad thing?
Honest news and conservative views.
It is Erick Erickson. I got to play you some audio from Ben Dominant. She was on Fox News, and he makes a point. You need to listen to his point because it is super relevant to the state of affairs in the United States right now.
Well, let me jump in because the Washington Post had a blockbuster series this week obtaining confidential documents about how three administrations, the Bush administration, Obama, and Trump, lied and misled about the Afghan war. We've been now for 18 years. And this wasn't the paper's opinion. This interviews with top officials, all kinds of documents, and it got very little pickup.
It's a huge story, Howie, and it should. I think most Americans are probably not surprised that the government has been spinning this story about the Afghanistan war to them over the years, but it should be the biggest story that we're talking about because we've spent $1 trillion and lost more than 2,300 American lives in a war that really don't know the purpose of anymore. And yet this story was not the one people were paying attention to. In fact, I consulted with Gravian, an internet service that tracks these sorts of things. And in the past 4 days, Jake Tapper raised it this morning for the first time, but in the past 4 days, CNN did no segments on the Afghanistan papers, but they did do 4 segments on this controversy that they were ginning up about this Thanos meme that the president had, his supporters had tweeted out.
Thanos is a Marvel Comics villain.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, the president's campaign team sent out a video meme on Twitter of the president's face digitized onto Thanos, and he snaps the Infinity Gauntlet. And Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, as they're having their impeachment press conference, they all turn to ash. And that deeply, deeply upset Don Lemon on CNN. Really upset Don Lemon that they would do this. His monologue, I played it several times the other day just to laugh at it. Don Lemon was very upset, but it continued on CNN. And they had 4 or 5 stories about the Thanos meme on CNN. They didn't cover, if Dominic is right, and I got no reason to doubt him, he and I used Grabian, and I went in and looked as well, and I can't find it anywhere. CNN did not cover the Afghan papers. If you're not familiar with the Afghanistan papers, the Afghanistan papers are from Open Records Act lawsuit, or Information Act lawsuit by the Washington Post, showing essentially, going back to the Bush administration, the Democrats and Republicans alike, Obama and Bush, and the diplomats and bureaucrats in the Defense Department and State Department have essentially engaged in a long-term cover-up of what's happening in Afghanistan. It's a really bad look for the government. It's very much like the Gone Papers against during Vietnam, where rosy projections were offered up that we weren't actually meeting, and they were led to have you believe that, in fact, we were making progress when we weren't. We've moved on from the story. It's a huge, huge story. The government has essentially been lying for a decade about Afghanistan. The government essentially has fabricated data on Afghanistan. That's a really big freaking deal. Really big deal. And we're not even talking about it anymore. We're not covering it. The Afghanistan conflict has been replaced by a meme and an obsession about Donald Trump. And that's part of the issue here. There's a genuine obsession on the left about the president now. And it's unfortunate because what they've done is they have allowed the president to control them and shape their news coverage in ways that I don't think really is appropriate, and there's no way around it. And by the way, I don't mean that disparagingly on the president. I mean as a pretty damning indictment on the American press, that if the president gets on Twitter right now and says, how about Kofifi makes a typo, for the next week, all we're going to hear about in the media is that the president, what did the president mean by Kofifi? And I'm not making that up because that actually happened. The press spent a week on the president making a typo on Twitter and not deleting it.
30.
The president has a superpower. He can get on Twitter and tweet something and send the media off in any direction. And he's been able to get them to completely ignore the Afghanistan story. It's a huge sensational story of media suing the government to get classified information, and the media isn't even talking about it because the president tweeted a meme about Thanos. That's absurd.